Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh. How are you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great. When this airs, we will be one day from the end of the U.S. election. And so...
But will you? That is the question.
I guess we're at the end of the... what people are saying is the end of voting happens. Will be happening tomorrow when everybody's...
Let's not even go there.
Yeah,
there's different podcasts for that.
I know. We enjoy some of the same ones, I think.
This is episode 11, and I'm very excited to bring a discussion with Ken Levenson for this episode. Ken Levenson, he'll be known to many passive house enthusiasts in the US. So if you don't know him by name, there's a very good chance that you'll have been influenced by him. Do you remember the first time you came across Ken?
Oh, I'm sure it was at a conference. It was one of the Theist conferences, I think, in his capacity as with 475.
Yeah.
I mean, he's ever present in the community.
So we get pretty deep in this interview, and we talk a lot about climate change as being one of the bigger issues. And I really like one of the things Ken describes Passive House as an approach to building and architecture that's actually proportionate to the crisis that we're facing. So he was originally trained as an architect, and he discovered Passive House in 2009, after which he quickly became certified, and considers himself pretty fortunate to have had a few clients at the time who were willing to try out what was at the time a pretty new approach for the New York scene. And through that process of getting involved in the first couple of projects, Ken met a Dutch architect and building scientist called Floris. Most people just know him as Floris. And together they realized that designers, builders, and tradespeople need some assistance to understand the underlying concepts of Passive House, things like airtightness. So together, Ken and Floris started what we know today as the high-performance building supply company known as 475. And education definitely remains a big part of their business. 475 is a sponsor of the Passive House Accelerator. Is that right?
Yeah,
Zach?
That's right. The patron sponsor. Thank you, 475.
Yeah, so it's great to be able to have a chat with Ken. This year in 2020, Ken has also taken on the new challenge as Executive Director at the North American Passive House Network, and he continues there to be heavily involved with educating the building industry about the benefits of Passive House. So here he is. I hope you enjoy. This is my chat with Ken Levenson of 475 and the North American Passive House Network. Ken Levenson, you almost don't need really, I don't think, much of an introduction, because a lot of people know you and a lot of people know 475. Let's go back to the beginnings of 475. Tell us, how did that originate?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Matthew. And 475 really came out of our excitement around Passive House and the possibilities for the future. If I could, I would even take a step back further. And really, I was practicing as an architect. I've been practicing in New York for a couple of decades, basically. And, the story is sort of being aware of climate change, of the environmental crisis, but then really getting hit over the head with An Inconvenient Truth in
Mm-hmm.
2006 by Al Gore. And, you know, after watching that, just being, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And going into that kind of cycle of not quite panic, but just being more or less obsessed. And I almost was thinking about it before as like, it's kind of like the Greta Thunberg moment, right? Where you decide like everything pivots and it's like, why aren't we talking about just this? And why aren't we acting on just this? But at the time, as an architect, I didn't know how to express that. And, um, I understood issues around sustainability and tried to be a more sustainable architect. But there weren't clear guideposts, and you didn't know where you actually stood. It felt like you were on quicksand. And it was discovering Passive House online at the beginning of 2009, I believe. And having that aha moment where it was like, oh, here is a um, an approach to building, to architecture that's actually proportionate with the crisis that we're facing. And I immediately, like I think many people that discover Passive House after being concerned with the crisis, looked up as much as I could. I was able to sign up for a course and did the training, met a bunch of people who are still considered close colleagues and friends to this day. And in my practice, I had my own small firm and uh, kind of set out to do Passive House projects. And I was very fortunate that I was able to have a couple of clients quite quickly sign on to it and started to develop these projects. One was a retrofit in New York City, in Brooklyn Heights, a historic brownstone, and through that process and working with other folks, I met Floris Keverling Busman, who's
Mm-hmm.
a building science consultant, Dutch architect who became my partner at 475, and he helped with some of the building science and blower door testing, and um, out of that work came the realization that education is so important, and not just our own education, but all the trades, all the people involved in the projects. And if this was going to work, if it was going to scale, and we truly believed that it should and it needed to, that it had to, we needed to figure out how to scale education and to how to scale bringing the products and components to the market. And Floris knew German and had been researching um, various companies and products. And we really was on the way back from a project, a Passive House project we were working on together in Connecticut, driving back to Brooklyn, New York. And it just kind of dawned on us that it was like, we could do this. Like, we could make these connections. We are in the practice. We understand what architects and consultants are looking for in terms of information and products. The Europeans have it, the Germans have it. And so we decided to set off at that point and do it. And so it was kind of an all or nothing thing. My wife thought I was insane, and we're still married happily.
Good,
Um,
good.
and we've gone through a few more moments like that, but
I mean, it's a leap, right? Because you, by that stage, been an architect for
yeah,
3 decades,
2 decades,
two
and
decades, and it's a different
and
business, right? You're going from a service business, which is all about your time, your intellect, your creative ideas, to selling products.
yeah. Well, and so the interesting thing was that we went into it, and maybe naively, I don't know, but thinking about it as architects, and Floris being a Dutch trained architect, and so yeah, it was a leap of faith just because there was no market, right? it didn't exist. There were just a couple of buildings literally going
Yeah.
on.
And
But
most of them would have been yours.
yeah, I would like to think so, but there were a few out there for sure. It was a very small player, and I was very grateful for that community um, starting out with because it was so sort of touch and go and kind of groping in the dark to figure out what needed to be done and how we were going to adapt things and make it work. But we made the leap, and not just made the leap. I mean, I shut down my architecture firm, and
Yeah, so it wasn't a gradual transition. It was stop,
yeah,
start.
no, yeah. I mean, we figured if we were going to make it work, that we needed to go all in and
Yeah,
just
wow.
go around the clock and be full in. And fortunately, we were in positions where we could economically float it for a little while and make it work. But
Mm-hmm.
we did need to earn a living ultimately from it. It wasn't going to be a charity uh, uh, exercise.
Yeah,
So we, yeah, we were just able to through the building science. I mean, what was critical in making the formation of 475 work, I think, were a couple of things. One was um, our approach that it would be a catalyst to changing changing the industry. That was very
yeah,
mission driven. So it
yeah,
clarified for us in terms of making education front and center and making and speaking to architects as architects and relating in that way. The other thing was that the European suppliers, so like Proclima, um, we were coming from a passive house point. So we didn't have the experience in terms of, selling building products. But we came at it from a serious building science point of view. And so folks from Proclima were testing the American market as other companies, and they just could not figure it out. They could not make heads or tails of it. They
like what are
know
these
everybody
crazy
says,
Americans doing?
yeah, exactly. And, everybody sees a big market, right? And a
Yeah,
big pot of gold at the end of the
yeah, a
rainbow.
couple of hundred million people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like the size of the EU, right? And we and so they would come and investigate and be like, we don't get it. And so we were able to position ourselves, get their trust because we were coming from such a rigorous point in the market
Yeah,
with Passive House, and be able to translate and be able to be that kind of like ambassador to make and also make sense of it to the Americans, that everybody's looking at these German products going, oh, what are you talking about? Like this, we've never heard of this stuff before. And bring those two worlds together.
clearly
So
it
it was
wasn't.
really exciting.
Clearly, it's not just about the weather tightness wrap or the air tightness barrier. It's about, you mentioned education a number of times there. It's about educating the market to those concepts of air
Yeah.
tightness and weatherization, and then saying, oh, and by the way, here's a solution for that we can help you with.
Yeah, absolutely. And starting very strongly, I mean, I think it's just not airtightness as the market understood what airtightness to mean, right? It's a whole new concept of
Yeah,
airtightness. And I think a clarifying thing was for us as a company to be able to start and build step by step was that recognizing airtightness was the key, was the cornerstone, was what everything else was built off of. And it was kind of like concentric circles of knowledge and competence and components and sales for that matter. Um, uh, and that it was that simple um, made it much easier to kind of like court a path, to set
mm-hmm.
a path forward. Although building systems and the integration of it can be quite complicated, we could start from really, really simplified perspective in a way, and
And
build
I think
passive
that,
house out of that.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
think that comes through in the brand now. We were just saying how I know that the colleagues that I work with who sell Proclima products, they love the way that 475 explains things and does simple videos and just talks about some of these concepts which can be quite complex. The physics and building physics, dealing with moisture, vapor, and pressure, and
right.
they're quite complicated. They can be quite complicated things, but dealing them in a way that is easy to understand is so imperative.
Yeah, I think, and I have to give a lot of credit to Johnny Rezvani, who's the director of communications at 475, and others who have contributed. But he's lifted it multiple levels beyond where we, ever was imagining. Um, uh, just the idea of simplifying the language and simplifying the messaging, that you need to explain things like you're talking to, no offense to grandmothers, but like, or your mother-in-law, no offense to mother-in-laws, but, that somebody who doesn't know anything about the industry, let's say, that in a way that they can get it. And I think
Yeah,
that's a real struggle. And I think far too often we fail um, to step out of our um, kind of self-interest in the nerdy, complications of it,
absolutely.
and allow ourselves to kind of dumb it down and understand the power of that in a good way.
And it's not necessarily
Um,
dumbing it down. It's making the communication appropriate for the audience, because your
right.
conversation with an architect is going to be different from a general contractor, and it's going to be different from a structural engineer, or from a real estate agent. Yeah, everyone's got a slightly different priority and a different way of absorbing that information. So I think the skill for someone like you guys is doing that and providing the same underlying information, but in different ways.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's about
Um,
making it accessible, right? Meeting people where they are.
we've skipped
At the end
over
of the day.
one of the probably the most obvious thing, which I kind of take for granted now, but you might have to explain for those who aren't familiar with Passive House. And also, by the way, for everyone in the Southern Hemisphere who uses metric, what's 475?
Yes, there you go. So 475 is refers to the passive house standard here in America, and I believe Liberia, and there's one other country
There's a niche market for you.
that yeah, that also uses the imperial measurement still. So it's a translation of the passive house standard to imperial 4.75 kilobtus. Uh, per square foot per year. Uh, and so we boiled it down, and it's so inside that even American passive house people who work in Imperial, like, nobody has any idea. You have to explain it,
The first
which is
time
fine.
I do remember the very first time I heard that, I have to admit, go and see if I could buy the domain. What was it? 150, I think it was, or
Oh
15
yeah,
point 15
yeah,
15.0.
15. Yeah,
Yeah.
15.
Which was which is obviously the metric equivalent of 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per annum.
Yeah,
So that's the heating
demand.
the energy demand allow for a passive house. But you're right; it's just become so synonymous now and so well known that people just know the brand so well.
Yeah, but they don't know where it comes from, though.
Yeah,
It's not. They know we're in the passive house business, perhaps, but there's no direct correlation,
yeah, yeah.
which is nice. It's a
It is
nice
kind of
little
nice.
thing
It's like a
for
little
people to
secret
find
story.
out.
Um, take us back to architecture in the 80s. What was
Oh
missing
my
from them?
gosh.
Obviously, you had this idea, and something crystallized around the inconvenient truth. But there must have been something underlying there that awakened inside of you that was missing from architecture?
Yeah, I mean, well, and it's been a real journey, I have to say, and it continues to be. And it's an invigorating journey, thank goodness, because everything else can be so depressing in a way, right? That to have in this work uh, this new perspective and way of thinking about building, and I think what's so interesting and why it really grabs architects and people that care about building design and construction um, is that back when I was practicing as an architect in the 90s, and I graduated from college in 89 um,
Right.
into a recession, and
Yeah.
like no work, and just struggling small firms, and growing out of that. In New York, there's a lot of corporate interior work, a lot of renovation work with additions and some new construction, but kind of a mixed bag. And in the 80s and 90s, New York it's the age of Ivan Boesky and Milken and just greed, Gordon Gekko and all of
Yeah.
that. Not a climate or environmentally conscious sort of setup. And um, for me personally and professionally, you look at doing these renovations or architectural projects, um, and find those moments and do where you can do things. But it was very much in the vein of the USGBC, I would say, and LEED. Which, not
Mm.
to knock it, it definitely has its positive points and has done a lot to good things to change the industry.
Yeah.
But it's very much uh, it's kind of reductive in adding, you're checking this box or doing that thing, and you're not rethinking the whole process in a way, or at
Yeah.
least it never did that for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it never connected the dots to me in a way that was meaningful and energizing.
Mm.
What
Mm.
it really took, um, I think, the process of being so at sea, realizing how screwed we were with the climate crisis, and just like people are waking up today with one disaster happening after another, but it was certainly predictable a long, long time ago. And the panic that people are waking up to now is perfectly valid several decades ago.
Yeah.
And but how do you act on that? What do you do that's meaningful? And so I spent some time as an architect, not really applying my climate panic to the architecture, but just
So it was
learning more
something.
about
It was something else. You went to work
yeah,
and
it
did
was
work, and then worried about the climate later.
exactly. And I did a lot of reading and blogging, and did stuff around, climate activism, in one form or another, but it wasn't embedded into my work in a way that I could see that connection. And it was with the discovery, so casting about there, like wondering how to make my professional life more connected to this, is when I discovered Passive House. And then it was, no looking back. It was very obvious what needed to happen.
And
And
that's led you now to current role, the first executive director of North American
yes,
Passive House Network.
yes, that's right. And which is another long, strange journey, because back in so, and it all happened very fast, right? It was like 2009, discovered Passive House, got started the initial training, and 2000 by 2011, we were founding 475 High Performance Building Supply. We a group of us started what became NAPHN. It was initially called the American Passive House Network, and we quickly grew to become the North American Passive House Network, because Passive House Western Canada was a group then, Passive House
Yeah.
Ontario, Quebec, and it had that sort of coverage to it. And it was informal alliance. Out of that, we formed a cooperative corporation within that legal framework and tried to operate that way for a number of years. And all of this, everyone's volunteering. It's all grassroots, just trying to make it work. And it was very difficult to do that.
Well, and I think anyone who's involved with other passive house associations and affiliates around the world can definitely relate to that.
Yes.
It's a bunch of passionate people.
What happened was, it was very hard to get momentum, right? And how do you build that? And we were all these atomized, groups, all have, we all have like $10 in the bank account and nothing to,
and a whole lot of passion.
Mass. Yes. And a whole lot of passion and doing a lot of great stuff, undoubtedly, and making progress, but not getting that critical mass. So a few years ago, we made the decision that this splintered structure, this cooperative structure wasn't working. We reformed as a nonprofit. Passive House Canada had formed by that time and was going strong in Canada as a national organization. And we decided to really refocus as an American organization. And as a nonprofit, we hired director for training, Sharon Gaber, who's been excellent, and she's
amazing. I've met Sharon at a couple of International Passive House conferences, and she's just a force of nature.
Yeah, she's got a lot of passion for it.
Yeah,
but what was happening in the last couple of years is because we were still grassroots, except for Sharon. It was one woman show, I should say. It was diluting our effort, and we couldn't get that momentum with education and everything forward. And so we were all kind of like, how do we do this and move forward and all of this? And I really wasn't thinking about it in as being executive director at all. I actually, if I could take one more step back, I apologize. But a year ago at this time, I was basically negotiating to step back from 475. I stepped back from day-to-day management. And I also resigned from the board of New York Passive House, which I helped found in 2010. And stepped back from the board of NAPHN. And I was kind of like, at the beginning of this year, like figuring out what I'm going to do when I grow up. And and my wife again, bless her, was like, what? But she was patient and supportive. And I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do or think about. I was volunteering for NAPHN a little bit. What I'd started to do more was volunteer for Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah.
And it was similar thing for Extinction Rebellion at the beginning of 2019, when I found Extinction Rebellion, climate, civil disobedience group, it was a similar feeling to when I discovered Passive House. It was like, oh, here's a group of people who are operating at the intensity that the moment deserves. And if we're going to do something civically, politically about it, like civil disobedience feels about right, and being loud and inconvenient. So I was doing more of that, and I'm still doing like trainings in civil disobedience and things around Extinction Rebellion. But so I was thinking about that and figuring out how it could all work out. And I was volunteering to run the conference this year, which turned out insane because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm grateful it turned out as well as it did, but it was like very touch and go. And with that, the pandemic happens, the murder of George Floyd happens, the explosion of Black Lives Matter, not just across the US, but around the world. climate crisis is heating up. And I just was like, what am I doing really? And how can I apply my experience, my knowledge, and what I'm interested in? And I just kept coming back to, well, maybe I should throw my hat in the ring for this position. Not that they were actively looking for it, because there's a lot of uncertainty, right, with the financials and everything.
It's a big step for an organization to go from a bunch of volunteers to kind of needing that person, but that anxiety of how we're going to fund it, how we're going to pay for it, and there might be enough to fund it for 6 months or something, but what happens then? And ideally that's when it all becomes more professional and there's a much better model. But it's like you've got to jump over that void to begin with, make the leap.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key thing well, I don't know the key thing, but a couple of things came together in terms of my feeling in the right place at the right time. The organization, I think, feeling like it was time that we needed to step it up. It was now or never, right? In terms of that. It given all these crises and everything going on. And, my willingness, I think, in talking in the context, to not put a big burden on the organization, that I will work to just put it out there. Like I've got to build the thing before I can start to make a living, which makes my wife a little nervous again. But I've assured her that we're going to make this bird fly.
You're not one to walk away from a challenge. That's for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things you are doing regularly now is you're fronting some of the trainings and events provided by the network. Do you want to give a quick shout out to those and some of the activities, the education activities that you're involved in?
Sure. And I think a key thing when I was stepping in to it and thinking about what we needed to do and prioritize, it was like about upping the level of engagement, public engagement, and public engagement to the general public, but also to the professionals and the likely stakeholders, and having that conversation and having that feedback loop and hearing from people what they're thinking about, what they're concerned about, what's working or not. And I really felt like it was important for me to get out there and to have those conversations. And so, giving the presentation and taking the questions and having the discussions from people that are new to Passive House has been a great way to do that. So every Thursday, I do a lunchtime introduction to Passive House, and it's a range of the folks that show up. We offer an AIA credit, a health, safety, and welfare credit. So it's a very good credit for attending that. And one Thursday it's 3:00 in the afternoon for the West Coast, and the next Thursday it's 12:30 for the East Coast.
Very inclusive and nice.
Yeah, and wanting to be an easy on-ramp for folks to, if they're interested, they can point, folks can point people to it and say, hey, go check that out, and get them acquainted. And it's been really great. And the other thing we've done is started a series we're calling NAPHN Live, which is meant to be, it's bi-weekly. It's every other Tuesday. And it's meant to accomplish a couple of goals. One is to put some good technical information out there. And we also do it for like an hour type presentation Q&A for AIA credit as well. But it also, NAPHN is made up of a number of regional chapters. And so we have each chapter host one of the events. And the idea is to have the content of that event relate to something that regional chapter cares about, is perhaps more applicable to their region or something they're just thinking about. And it allows them to curate that content as well as put them out in the public on the national stage and have that different scale of connection.
So good. I
Um,
mean, we see so much of that. I mean, we obviously with the Passive House Accelerator now and the happy
yeah,
hour,
it's
and
wonderful.
that sharing of knowledge is just happening. It continues to happen, which is really great. And I think other people can benefit from that, or either join in with those sessions that you're running, which are fantastic, but also learn from that in other time zones as well.
Yeah, no, I mean the power. I mean the pandemic has really unleashed a tidal wave of knowledge sharing,
Yeah, true, true.
and it's amazing. You
Yeah,
cannot keep up with it, and it's really
no,
about like having as good quality as possible and
yeah,
enough variety, and really about producing, right? That um, you need to get it out there because
yeah.
um, that's the only way. It's
What are your thoughts about the future?
mixed,
Mm-hmm.
mixed. I would say for Passive House, I'm very bullish, and I think I'm always. I mean, I'm forever by nature an optimist, and I think, when when we set out in the States in around 2009, the 2008 2009, with a community and growing. Um, it was magical in that, and I think it's still this way because whatever anybody says, like, Passive House has grown so much, there's so many people know about it. I'm like, we're still just scratching the surface. Like,
Yeah.
really nobody knows about Passive House. um but back at that time, it was truly, we were like, nobody knew about it. And but it was like you could see the future, right? And it was like this superpower where you could see over the horizon and see what was coming. And that really carried us through, I think. And we've built, and it's incredible to see the effects in places like New York and in California. They're having bigger and bigger effect in Massachusetts and in our national scene, and I know around the world, uh, big effects in many ways. Um, and I think it's only going to grow. I think the it becomes more and more obvious as people wake up to what we're facing in terms of the need for mitigation and adaptation, resilience. Um, uh, so that I'm excited about in a positive way. I think, in terms of the climate crisis in general, it's very hard to be optimistic. And I actually, in the Extinction Rebellion frame, or maybe I shouldn't put it on that, but me and working through it, it's like, optimism just isn't a useful phrase given what we're facing,
Right.
or hope isn't a good word either. There's no reason to be hopeful or optimistic. It's like we're going off the cliff. It's just how deep is the cliff, and how far can we like start to crawl our way back. Um, and so I'm energized by that. Like, we need to take action and have courage to do everything that we can do to make it as good as possible, uh, for future generations. But it's going to be bad. I mean, the New York Times finally today, they had an article above the fold that was like really describing the cascading disasters and how we're like facing a bleak future or a really horrendously awful future. And it's like, wow, they could have written that article a decade ago. They didn't really need to wait for this moment. So from that, from the environmental point of view, I don't know, and nobody has any reason to be optimistic. It's a disaster, and from a political, social point of view, in the United States, it's utter chaos. It's like it's unimaginable what's going on. It feels like, we're in a sci-fi movie.
I guess
It's
the trick
just
and I think it's a good point about putting hope, not just being blindly hopeful and not being Pollyanna-ish in a unrealistic, optimistic way. but making a connection like you did those years back, and not just compartmentalizing climate into something
Right.
different from our daily work, but thinking, what do I need to change about what I do on a daily basis that's going to contribute to this in a positive way,
Yeah.
or at least reduce the burden? Because, like you say, there's a cliff. It's going to hurt. There's going to be consequences. Some of that's unavoidable. It's more about how can we minimize that? How can we design
Right.
for that and pull ourselves out of it with the least amount of hurt?
Yeah. Which is a lot of hurt.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's like it's I don't know. It's
There's no
very
way of
bad.
sugarcoating it.
Yeah, one shouldn't sugar. But the one thing is, it's like, and this is a struggle with my wife, because my wife, who's an incredibly brave person and courageous and hardworking, she's an investigative journalist, and she goes up against real bad people and puts like bad people in jail and makes them lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, and she in these things, she becomes paralyzed by it. It's like she becomes depressed by it, and um, does not is get lost in that kind of despair. And the trick is to engage that sense of despair and that emotion,
Mm,
and activate that and put it to use, and
mm,
use that to empower yourself.
mm,
In whatever way that makes sense. And I think, we're lucky that we have such a direct connection with what we do in work every day, that it's easy to channel that through. But,
mm.
I think, with political activism, with things like civil disobedience, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or something else, it's a way for anybody to connect in a more powerful way, to take more drastic action. So, yeah.
Sobering stuff. Well, Ken, I
I
think
do
it's
have a sense of, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's appropriate that we don't try and end on a positive, hopeful note. I think your message is really clear there, that there is going to be some pain, but it's going to be up to people like us to go with that and do what we can. But
Yeah, I think,
I do want to honor your journey, the work of 475, and now also the work of the North American Passive House Network, and the great stuff that so many passionate people are doing in your organization. But there are all those other organizations that are similar, full of volunteers, just getting out there and trying to spread the message through
yeah,
education and networking, and doing really good stuff. So we just need to keep that up.
yeah. No, thank you. And I totally, yes, it takes many, 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 many. And I will be the first to be grateful for the much wider ecosystem within
Mm-hmm.
our industry, and the wider sort of related the efforts. It's remarkable. And I find it a real privilege to work with so many amazing people, and so many people that are committed and have, um, you know, that we're so blessed and kind of fortunate that we are in a field and doing things that, by and large, everybody is really choosing to be doing.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
not like they're forced to be in these jobs, and many, many people are changing careers to do this sort of work, and
Yeah.
taking pay cuts, and taking, you know, uh, not necessarily making their lives easier. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yeah.
If I could just say I don't know if it's a final note, but a note that in looking at NAPHN, going forward, I mean, is our intention to really, stand up and make sure that, God, fingers and toes crossed, that if we actually have a fair election, and we actually elect a new administration, that, we need to be prepared to make sure that we don't blow it. That we actually, when we're taking climate action, it's not boondoggles, and we're doing not just any Green Deal, but a Green Deal that is truly effective. And I think Passive House has to be a real big part of that. And so I feel a lot of urgency around that in the possibility that.
I've just written down, I wonder if Passive House is architectural disobedience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually very interesting. I've talked about it in this way that that it is, and it was one of the things when I came into the role. If I could say, I don't think this was a terribly sensitive private conversation, but talking with some of the board members and me expressing the idea that we need to be out there a bit more, right? And Passive House forces building professionals to be a little bit uncomfortable, right? It forces them to think about things that they didn't have to think about before and question their habits and reevaluate what they're doing. And it can be a very disquieting process and probing and questioning and unsettling, and engaging with the climate struggle writ large through the politics and everything. It's like, if we're not making people feel uncomfortable about it, I don't think we're doing our jobs. It's people will just be complacent and go on with habits.
Mm-hmm.
And so of unhelpful habits. And so that sort of commonality of re-engaging and being rigorous about questioning assumptions and what we're comfortable with, really, really invigorating. It's cool. It's fun in a lot of ways, and it's exciting. And I think it's something that young people and the generation coming up can naturally find attractive.
Yeah.
And that's where the future really is.
Thank you, Ken. It's been a pleasure. We could carry on, and maybe we should carry on at another time. But great to chat, and really appreciate all your work that you've done and ongoing work as well.
And you as well.
And that was Ken Levenson there. As I mentioned at the intro, it gets pretty deep. Wasn't expecting to get, I guess, a little bit dark, but a bit of a sense of reality, Zach, on that interview.
That's right. There's no question that we're headed for some rough waters, and I think that we're already experiencing that. With I think the wildfires, bushfires, all sorts of stuff. So, there's that truth, that inconvenient truth, going back to kind of I think part of what sparked it for Ken. Is something that we need to hold as difficult and uncomfortable as that is, for sure.
So what do you say to listeners of this show and all those working in the field now? What do we take from that? We don't want to just go and hide in a hole and say that it's all too hard.
No, absolutely not. Paul Romer is an economist who he won the Nobel Prize in 2018, and he addresses this notion of optimism, and Ken mentioned, critiqued that the word optimism is something, maybe not useful when we're talking about climate, but and I respect that. And Paul Romer's kind of frames it in a different way, and that is, there's a difference between complacent optimism and conditional optimism, and he describes complacent optimism as a child who's waiting for a Christmas present, just waiting for a present to drop into their lap. And conversely, conditional optimism is that child imagining a treehouse and knowing that if she can bring together her friends and some expertise about building tree houses and find the nails and the screws and the wood, all together they can build something that's really important. And I think that is exactly what we are committed to in the Passive House community. That yes, we have serious challenges ahead of us, but we also have an amazing planet. And regardless of the changes that are ahead of us, it's always going to be worth saving the things that we love. And there's so much that we can save, and a future that can be bright in its own ways, even as we are weathering new storms. So another thing,
which will come. Yeah, the storms will come.
That's right. Right. We know they're coming. It's not to pretend that they're not coming and to kind of wish them away. But how do we prepare for them? We need to mitigate what we can and adapt to everything else, and I think before we were recording, you were talking about, how Passive House has elements of both of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's why I think, I like that story that it's not enough to just hope. You need to actually do something. And Passive House gives us that solution to do something which is going to be beneficial for reducing our impact, particularly around energy, which is at the core largely responsible for some of the mess that we're in. But it's also a great way to build resilience. And we are going to have more extremes in weather, hotter summers and colder winters, more severe wind. And we need shelter that is going to provide health and comfort with minimal energy use. And so Passive House provides both of those. It's great for resilient buildings and also reducing energy consumption. So we have a solution. And I think if anyone, what to take out of that conversation with Ken is to heed the warning, but don't get depressed for too long.
Right.
Don't be that child that's just waiting for something to fall out. Get active, get with other people. I think that's the other really great thing about that analogy is connect with other people through things like the Passive House Accelerator, and the happy hour is such a great way for people to connect with others who have different resources, so that we can do this together, because we can't do it on our own, and we don't have to. We've got a great network of really skilled people, some great products now in the market, and we have the solutions. And we have science too. We can use science. We have that on our side.
We do. And we also, I think, have, we really do. I think we're really seeing momentum in terms of action, and politicians understanding that they actually have to take this seriously. The presidential campaign of Joe Biden has been a perfect example of that, and that it's like night and day, 2020 versus 2016 in terms of how central that is to the campaign, and major investments. I was listening to Michael Liebreich's podcast, and he was just talking about the fact that the EU is budgeting $350 billion of investment in building energy efficiency per year from now until 2030. Yeah. And that's a combination of public and private investment, but $350 billion. That's so huge. And he was also saying that the International Energy Agency says that in order to meet our Paris targets, that we need to be investing in building energy efficiency. We need to move up from our current level of 200 billion to 800 billion per year in dollars. Yeah. So just the EU is getting us a huge part of the way if follows through on that commitment to doing what we probably need to be doing in terms of energy retrofits. So, or at least by one definition. So, and it's just like things are moving, even in the face of the kind of the grim realities of these changes that the climate change is bringing about. So, there's I think we can build a really important, treehouse.
Nice. Like it.
It'll be nice.
Things are moving. What are some of those things that we've got coming up?
Yeah, well, as always, there's lots going on. For the Passive House Accelerator, the happy hour that's happening next week is going to focus on the stepwise tower retrofit in Ontario. So this is a multifamily high-rise retrofit, and it's really interesting for two reasons. One, it's happening with the residents in place, and two, because of budget restrictions, it's doing this in a phased way. So it's thinking about, here's the goal. We're going to get to an enter-fit retrofit. We're going to do it in 4 phases. How do we sequence that and make that work? So that's Jennifer Hogan will be presenting that next Wednesday. On November 12th, Thursday, we're going to be presenting a special event. It's a prefab summit. And this is, it's applicable, I think, and probably interesting to a global audience. It will have specifics around both West Coast of the U.S. producers and, well, not just U.S. and Canada, and East Coast producers. So there will be a little bit of a geographic focus just because of the nature of delivery of prefab. But we're going to be looking at Passive House prefab on the 12th. Should be,
that's super exciting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And then obviously, lots going on in the community as well. So the UK Passive House Conference is happening on Wednesdays in November. So check that out for sure. The Passive House Canada Summit is coming up on December 8th through 10th. Lots of great stuff. Don't miss it.
If you haven't already, make sure you do sign up for the newsletter and information at Passive House Accelerator, because then you will get weekly updates of all the activities, because there is so much going on. It's hard I find it hard to keep track, but exactly. Zach and the team do a great job of collating all that and making it easy to find events and activities that are on. And if you'd like us to know about something that we haven't got on there, please let us know. Contact us at podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com. We'd love to hear from you, and also feedback on the show too.
The Passive House podcast and all of the programs of Passive House Accelerator are made possible by generous support from our sponsors. So I want to say thank you to them. Our founding sponsors are Baxtingui Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. Thank you.